Hey guys, this is Doug. I'm here with Brandon, and today we're going to talk about the top tips to become the greatest Malifaux player in the world.
That's so many tips!
Oh my god! Hey guys, this is Doug. I'm here with Brandon. Brandon,
Hello.
say hello.
I'm Brandon. Hello, the internet.
And we are here today to. I think this is going to be probably one of our more useful videos, honestly, that we've done in
Yeah,
a while.
For
To
sure.
be honest, right?
This might actually be the most useful video we've ever done.
Yeah.
Certainly better than the Zoraida tier list that I just finished editing. We'll be posting shortly.
So the context for what we're going to do today is in our Discord, we have a section in our Discord that's just for ideas for content, right? And it's just an open forum area where people can post ideas, and if they're good or if they're a good match with what we're planning to do or stuff we want to make, then we use it a lot of the time. And I think literally as of recording 4 days ago, 3 days ago, sorry, looking at the timestamp, one of our Discord members, Spilled Paint Pot, posted a question in the ideas for videos, and he said, "Hey Doug, I have like 25 questions, and these are questions that have come up after I've played, about 25 to 30 games of Malifaux. So, I'm by no means learning the rules, but I'm by no means a master. And there's some conceptual questions and overall questions that I've been thinking about and writing down and as I've been playing. And I just wanted to post these, see if that would be helpful or if that's maybe usable for a video." And I was like, yes, post them, send them to me. And he sent them to me, and they are really well thought out.
Yeah.
Like a couple of them are like just specific to his experience, which is fair. He didn't know a YouTube video was going to be made about his questions immediately, but like,
I mean, for the most part, they're pretty general, and I think almost all of them will help any new Malifaux player that's trying to learn stuff.
Not even new player, like they're going to help players that are
to be fair, not brand new. Like this won't help you before you play your first game. But this is like more in-depth tactical and strategical things.
This is the step right after you start to fully understand the rule sets and you've played enough games to like kind of see how stuff folds out,
Yeah.
But you're not by any means like battling for an MWS tournament or something. You're like a solid Malifaux player at this point. You have experience, and you're like, you might have some conceptual questions about some of these tactical stuff, I think. And I think there's a lot of people that are in that scenario, honestly.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
I think so.
All right. So we're not going to waste too much time. We're going to get right into it.
All right. Question 1. AP efficiency. What makes an action efficient or inefficient?
AP efficiency, I think, is a core concept in the game, and understanding what makes something efficient or doing something that's really efficient versus doing something that's inefficient, I think is like the big picture concept for playing winning Malifaux in general. Normally, when you look at a base model in Malifaux, you kind of look at it as having 2 normal AP and a fast action. AP efficiency is usually when you can take 1 action or 1 AP and turn it into 2 AP, or sometimes even more. And usually it's really good to even just convert 1 AP into 2 AP. I think the biggest version of doing that I can think of, the easiest, cleanest explanation of this as an example, is Maxine, my homegirl. She's the best. I love her. She has a ability on her card called Impromptu Invention, and she, with a trigger on it, can split a condition that she shoots onto a target. And if you choose fast, you can shoot for 1 AP fast onto 2 models, which then gives you 2 AP. It's an incredibly efficient action, and she's able to do it on a very consistent basis, and is one of the cleanest examples of turning a single AP into multiple AP. The general idea is that you can be really, really efficient with your AP in terms of actions that can do multiple things or achieve multiple things on the board state. You're generally going to be playing from a forward position on the Malifaux table. And in fact, some crews' things is that they got a lot of AP efficiency. And generally you're looking to maximize that. And that's kind of what AP efficiency is, at least in my mind.
Yeah.
Brandon?
generally speaking, you're not, in most cases, I don't think you're evaluating any individual action specifically on efficiency. Usually when people say AP efficiency in Malifaux, what they're talking about is, does this model have the throughput to do more than just like the basic stuff? So if you look at like the general actions in Malifaux, like walk is one, attack isn't really a general action, but like let's assume that like an attack is like a pretty baseline thing. And if you look at something like the charge action, you have an action that gives you effectively a walk and an attack, right? And so having, to build on what Doug said, having like the ability to generate multiple valuable things, whether it's positioning stuff where you get to move your models, or attacks where you get to throw extra attacks onto models and units, is it, like the more stuff you get out of any individual action, the better. But that also can like refer to like, you know, making sure that you do this thing where if you take this action first, you'll be in range of this like aura or this other ability. And so you'll get like more value out of it. Like you'll get to build in a trigger for free, or you'll get some extra resource, or get to draw a card if you know, do this action within range of something else. So there's not a hard line that makes an action efficient or inefficient. And we'll get to like the walk action in a little bit. But in general, the more you can get per thing, the better. And when we talk about a model being very AP efficient, what we usually mean is that in addition to its 2 normal AP that it gets, it has a bonus action, or like can get fast by itself. And if it has like a bonus action, that bonus action does something that we want to do. That's not just like a nebulous effect, something that's usually like gives them an extra move, like creep along, or what's that walk, the action, the bonus action that's get a walk for free? Onward, right? Or maybe it's something that lets you attack a second time, or a third time.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah.
Number 2.
Yeah. Number 2, unpack. So I understand that this means deployment of your crew, and that people think that it's very important. Can you go into some detail on what you think about when you're unpacking your crew and why?
Yes, absolutely. This is so important that when Brandon and I practice Malifaux with each other, and we practice Malifaux in a very specific way. Basically, we will set up a bunch of different games and play like 2 turns, basically, and then talk about the game, and then immediately re-rack, because we believe that mastering the unpack for a crew is so important that if you do it well, it can lead to a lot of victories, and if you fuck it up, you can just kind of lose as a result of it, or just really kind of underpitch the value of your crew in general. Generally, what you're looking at for the unpack, and generally what the unpack means, is that it is, how is your crew planning to efficiently get out of its deployment zone and put it into a position where it can start scoring points in the specific board state against that specific team with this specific pool of schemes and strategies. So you're basically trying to figure out, how am I going to get my guys up the board and into relevant positions with as little AP expenditure as possible? So again, now we're looking still at AP efficiently. How are we going to, from an AP efficiency standpoint, get our models over the course of the first turn into a position where they can be impactful for me over the rest of the game and score points and be in places where they need to be to get their jobs done? To me, that's the core of the unpack. Now, what does that mean? That means a lot of the times there's like a couple models in your crew that'll have movement abilities. One of the big movement abilities that I can think of is Ket's movement ability in Tiri, where he can spam the gravity well that like moves people, or how the old Cadmus kids had a really good unpack where they could just like pulse like little bubble movement bips over and over and over and over and over, and then move their whole crew like up the board a whole bunch. Some other unpacks might be really aggressive unpacks. Like, I know that my old school unpack with Maxine 2 involved Tidecaller throwing Harata and Max up the board, and that's maybe part of an unpack. But basically, for me, the general answer to that question is, how am I going to put my models in a place that they're going to be successful over the course of the first turn, and how am I going to do that efficiently? And usually the answer to that is, you've baked in some amount of movement abilities for your creature or for your crew. And usually you can target key models and get them up the board into good positions. Another really good, easy example of that is any of the riders, targeting like a master and using Ride with Me on them to throw them to the board early so they don't have to use them movement AP. That's another example, like a base level example.
Yeah.
Oh, and I guess also the unpack. Sometimes if you're running a what Brandon and I call a Rube Goldberg team, which means like a team that needs to like bibble bobble around a bunch and like put poison or burning on itself or can put a bunch of conditions on itself, that unpack can also mean the process of starting that engine. So I'll give you a practical example here again. Like in a brewmaster crew, what do you do to make sure your whole crew has like 10 or plus 10 poison at the end of the turn? That process and executing that A to B to C to D to E to G, like that whole chain, that is the unpack for brewmaster, and you have to do that while also putting them in a position to be impactful after that process is finished. Brandon, what do you got?
Yeah. So I think Doug started off with like how we sort of practice our unpacks, which is probably one of the most crucial parts of the game for sure. I think it's important to practice the end game as well, because you can be perfect and do everything right for the first 3 turns and then still lose the game by 5 points because you don't know how to close. So I think just starting isn't the goal, but you definitely, like, because most tournament games, at the very least, if that's what you're prepping for, tend to be timed and usually will only go a couple of turns. Usually being able to get your models where you need them to go is the most important thing. And that's always the case, right? If you have your whole crew tripping over and stumbling over themselves, you're not going to do very well ever. So that's super crucial. That's the first thing. So what we say when we mean unpack really is usually the first round of activations and what you do with your models, because very rarely in Malifaux do you just put models down and then decide that they're going to attack stuff, right? Like, you're going to need to, in most cases, know what the scheme is, know what the strat is, and know what schemes you're going for. Build your crew specifically to be able to do those things, and then deploy in such a way and then activate in such a way that everything that you're doing brings you closer to achieving those goals. Some examples, I think, of really important unpacks, like Doug sort of mentioned, are some Rube Goldberg-esque type things. There are definitely crews that are more just sort of point and play or click and play, where you just put the models down and then, this guy's going to go do this thing, he's my beater. This guy's going to go do this, he's going to deny this point of the board. That's, the sort of light end of it is knowing where models are going. But in the heavy end of it, like, I'll use Hoffman as an example, because I think that's one of the more defined unpacks of the game. So Hoffman has an ability, Hoffman's totem has an ability that doesn't seem very important, but in fact, it gives you potentially an insane amount of movement. It's called Internal Magnet on the Mechanical Attendant, which lets you choose either towards or away, and then you get to push every single model that's within 6 inches, either toward or away the Mechanical Attendant, but you only get to push them if they have power tokens or a scrap marker. So what you need to do to maximize the benefit of that massive movement ability, which can also be combined with, like, Harris J5 also has sort of a little bit of a pulse movement as well. But to take really, like, good use of Internal Magnet, you need to activate in such a way where you're activating Hoffman first in a bubble, so that you give everybody that you want to push a power token. You need to deploy in such a way that the models that you want to push up, which are usually like Peacekeeper or Melissa Core or Ryle, or not Ryle, what's his name? Howard Langston, and these, like, big beefy beaver models, or J5, or any of the things you want to push, you have to put them in front of the Mechanical Attendant such that they can, like, see each other, that they can all get a token from Hoffman. You activate Hoffman, give them all tokens, and then you have to have deployed them and be in such a way that Mechanical Attendant can go and just Internal Magnet, which will let you push 3 inches and then 3 inches. And knowing exactly that that's your plan, is to push as many models as you possibly can with the Internal Magnet ability, is really sort of like the nitty-gritty of that specific deployment. And that's not always going to be something where you're really building everything around one ability. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 different abilities, or sometimes you're trying to get, like, a really common one is Blasphemous Ritual, which is just it's on a bunch of different stuff. Basically, you have to eat a corpse marker and you give out focus to everybody, because maybe you're playing Nephilim and you want everybody to have focus, because focused attacks hit harder and do more damage. So putting yourself in a position where you can have, like, models that are there to be buffing models move to give all of the other models focus, so that way when they activate, they're all loaded up with focus, ready to go, and can just fly charge, or run or fly with me, walk, charge, you know? So it's kind of the first turn, but it's also kind of knowing exactly what actions you want to do when. And because Malifaux is a game where you're not really going to have a whole lot of interaction with your opponent on the first turn, especially if you're playing corner deployment, you can kind of practice it on your own without having an opponent, and knowing exactly where you need to put things to be able to reach all of the abilities you need them to reach and all the actions that you need them to reach, so that you can have like sort of a go plan of, I'm going to activate my first couple turns, or my first turn of the game, I'm going to activate model 1, model 2, model 3, and then we'll be reactive and sort of see where they go. So that's kind of that. Number 3. Alpha Strike. I do not understand how Alpha Strike works in an alternating activation game. Makes sense in a game like 40k, but I can't understand the appeal in Malifaux.
All right, so Alpha Strike refers to a really specific play style. Usually, if you're doing an Alpha Strike, you're usually doing an incredibly powerful, proactive action in the early phases of the game, while your opponent is doing their unpack or is preoccupied with kind of, I guess, honestly, is doing their unpack, right? So the idea is to catch them early, to hit a large section of their crew with a powerful effect, and to try to win the game off of the back of that effect. The biggest, most recent example in my mind of an Alpha Strike is if you're playing on like Wedge or something, and you're playing against, say, Sandeep 2 or now the new Sonya 1. Both of those models can activate, like just as a single model. They can activate, move to the middle of the board very easily. Sandeep can self-throw himself. Sonya can use her fast action. And then they can just bomb your entire crew with their 3 AP activation. Sandeep does it through using pyre markers and just setting everything on your crew on fire and setting them in a bunch of pyre markers. Sonya does it with blast markers, setting people on fire. But the idea is that you're committing a proactive early activation of a very powerful model to try to disrupt the early phases of the opponent's crew and cripple them. Another one that Brandon and I are both huge fans of.
No, don't do it. I want to say it.
Okay, yeah. I'll let Brandon talk about him, because that's another prime example. Go ahead, Brandon.
So the Alpha Strike that comes to mind when you're talking Alpha Strike in my man is Manos. So Manos is a Rezzer's henchman from the Onlo crew, and basically he has a stat 5 willpower attack that is fine. It does 2, 3, 4 damage, but it has a trigger on it that he can build in very easily that will pulse out staggered to every single model within 2 inches.
It's Divine Strike. It's the tome
Divine
trigger.
Strike. Yeah, and there's a couple models that have it in the game. There's a couple Ten Thunders models, a couple Rezzer models. But basically, what that does is, especially against crews that are all bunched up, or crews that have a lot of movement shenanigans where they get to like have one model, like Hoffman, for instance, where you have one model that lets you move a whole bunch of models.
Yeah.
If you give staggered to all those models, not only can they not do that by themselves, but when they come to activate, they're going to be at -2 move to walk until the end of their activation, which is going to completely fuck up. Like if you're playing a crew that every single model is going to have like 6 to 8 inches of unactivation movement where you're doing it with other models, that just is 0 now with staggered, you know?
Yeah. So Alpha Strike is using a strong proactive piece to really try to put it to your opponent very quickly and very early in the game to apply pressure and to disrupt their unpack. The idea is that if you can successfully do that, and you yourself can proactively advance your board state and your position on the board while keeping your opponent locked in the deployment zone, or immediately trying to scalpel an important model from your opponent's crew that is a core cog in that machine, you can just cut a leg out from under them and then lean on that for the duration of the game.
Yeah, and it's not only specifically even the first turn, right? So like a lot of times when you're talking Alpha Strike crews, you'll talk really, really powerful attacking models that can like just kill things or come close to killing things, and then making sure that you have the ability to know who is going to go first in the second round by either holding a 13 or keeping a red joker back, so that you can end of activation get where you want to be, and then top of turn 2 kill a model before it activates. And although it's way better in 40k to just like wipe your whole opponent's army before they do anything, because you're not pass tokens are calculated at the very start of the turn in Malifaux. So if you're killing models before they activate, then they're going to be down in activation. You're going to get activation control, and then you can sort of wreak havoc with their game plan.
Number 4.
The walk action seems frowned on, but I don't really understand why. Don't you have to get your models around the board? Yes, in short, you do. But Douglas,
It's because it's the most vanilla AP investment possible. And oftentimes when you're looking towards AP efficiency, you're looking towards things that can like do like a push to advance your model, but also like, for example, the best 2-for-1 in the game, and everyone can do it mostly, is charging. That's a push of your movement plus an attack, right? So you're always looking for ways to not have to just use the walk action to go where you're going. And there's push placement, there's displacement, there's group
Leaping,
ping
teleportals.
movement. There's all sorts of ways to do that in the game. And generally, the colloquialism, which is not always true, but it does stand relatively true, is the person that has to push the walk button the most in a game of Malifaux is often bleeding AP efficiency. And that's why people are saying if you're taking the walk action a bunch, you're probably losing that game because you're having to position and reposition your models. The idea is that you want to try to find an efficient way to move your models, and the walk action is not always that, unless for some reason you're flooding your team with like fast or something like that, or you're doing an out of activation walk. And that's generally what people are saying.
Yeah, walk's kind of the lamest because there are so many good options in the game where you get to move and do stuff like charge, for instance, like Doug said. Walk is just kind of vanilla, so like if you can do anything but walk and still get to move, generally that's the right call. Unless it like costs cards or stuff. Like creep along is great, but it's a lot of the things that are like walk-like abilities usually will be, maybe they'll be a bonus action, but usually they'll cost some sort of resource. So it's really about getting those resources to be as low as possible and spending as little as possible so that you can kind of get the walk action as like a bonus action and then still do two good things. Because like realistically, shooting a model or drawing a card is much better than spending 1 AP to just put your model slightly in a different place.
Agreed. Number 5.
Value. There's a lot of discussion around value of models and actions. What determines the value?
I mean, this is a little bit of a deeper question. It's obviously relative, right? This is tied to AP efficiency, and whether or not a model is impactful for its point cost. I guess for me, when I talk about value of models, usually what I'm referring to is, does this model perform at or above the expected level for how impactful I think it's going to be on the board state for how many Soulstones that it costs?
Yeah,
and
which
usually,
actually is kind of the next question. So how do you determine what is valuable when putting your crew together? I may
yeah,
have misunderstood how that was asked, but it's basically all the same question.
yeah, this is like the same question, I guess. So we'll answer this together. I think is fair, right? To do. Okay. So the answer to this question for me is, I look at the baseline. So like Brandon and I, when we're building lists together and talking about lists, we'll always like, sometimes we'll be like, all right, like I have a couple of models that are a baseline expectation for my crew. Relative to those baseline expectation models, what are the other models that I would consider? Right? And so that is usually how I'll try to draw value, or I'll draw value by, I know that the faction that I'm playing has a handful of very high roll models that are, in the 7, 8, 9 Soulstone range. And these are kind of the baseline for my hiring criteria. I'll give a practical example, right? In Rezzers, if I'm playing competitive Rezzer portfolio, because Brandon and I are both Rezzers, so we can speak a common Rezzer language here. If I wanted to hire a model, I could hire access to Manos. I have access to Vincent for anti-summon. I have access to Archie for leaping beaters. So if I'm looking at a value proposition, I'm comparing models to their relative roles and what I have access to. And if I think a model is not as good at that job, then I'll be like, all right, I don't really want to pay 10 Soulstones for this model that I think is worse than my baseline value for a beater, which is Manos or Archie in Rezzers. And so I think that that's bad value. Or I think that this 8 Soulstone model is overcosted because I think it's very killable and it's not very AP efficient. So that's bad value. When I think of how a model has value or not value, that's what I think of in terms of determining putting a crew together. Brandon.
Yeah, but I completely agree. I will say value is all relative. In many circumstances, there are just like sort of models that I think will probably never, I guess, make their points back, for lack of a better term. But it's very easy to do this with beater models, because you're like, okay, is this model going to kill other models? Yes, great. Is there something that costs less Soulstones that I can do this with? If so, then that might be a better option to go with, unless you need more of it. Same thing with like schemer models. So like taking Neverborn as an example. If you're hiring a model and all that model is going to do the entire game is to walk around the board and interact with either the strategy markers or dropping scheme markers, like and you're, it's basically super fragile and will die if it gets harassed by anything serious, and you're paying 4, 5, 6, 7 stones for that. Why would you do that when you have access to a model that costs 3 stones that basically does all of that? Maybe there's a reason, maybe there's not. But usually when we're talking about value of models, we're talking specifically, is there something that I can hire for less Soulstones that does that? As far as valuable actions are concerned, usually that's like specifically in relation to point scoring. So like, is the ability, like a lot of times we talk about models that can interact, walk, interact. So that's models that like have a bonus action to move themselves, or a way to get a third AP to move themselves, and that's super valuable for scoring in almost all cases, because the ability to like drop a scheme marker, move, drop a scheme marker means that that model in and of itself can usually get close to scoring you a whole point by itself. And if you have that something you can do that's like kind of uninteractable, you just do it like right at the end, then like you can almost for sure know that that's something that will score you a point. Whereas like an action that's less valuable, like giving you some sort of buff or like temporary thing or nebulous bonus, usually those are the less good things. But that like that sort of depends greatly on what you're playing for crew wise. So usually it's around points or cost if we're talking value. But that sort of rolls into the next question.
Number 6.
Bad models. So in the tier list videos, there's often talk about models being bad. Acelin, the Malisaurus Rex, Carver, etc. I love how those are all Neverborn, by the way, with the fun guy. What makes a model bad? Is this only bad for a competitive meta, or just bad for the current GG, or bad design?
Okay, so this ties into the value conversation and the AP efficiency conversation. Generally, if we're listing a model in a bad section of the tier list, it's because we feel that the model has either bad value relative to the rest of its peers within that pool, or that it is very AP inefficient for its point cost. So those are generally the two primary drivers that would elicit us at the Danger Planet specifically to put a model into that tier. Brandon.
Yeah, I mean, this more than anything else is aggressively relative. Like, if we look at like pretty much any model, but just to throw out an example, like Angel Eyes, right? So Angel Eyes in Neverborn, that is a faction that doesn't have a lot of good ranged options. She's an amazing range beater. She's super, super valuable. If we had Angel Eyes in like Outcasts or like Guild, would she be as valuable? Probably not. Are you in a position where you have, again, a model that can do the job that you're trying to do for less Soulstones? And if so, hire it. A lot of times the bad model discussion with like Malisaurus, it's absurdly expensive. Or Acelin, she basically doesn't have any text on her card. It's fine. So sometimes it's bad because of that, or sometimes, like in the Malisaurus case, we say that a model is bad because it's, one, pretty expensive, and two, has a very, very, very easily exploitable weakness. So the Malisaurus Rex has a very, very low willpower, and because he has such a low willpower, if the opponent has anything that can make him take an action, you can sort of shut him off for the round. And that's like a serious liability that you have to worry about against a pretty substantial number of crews. The bonus action on one of his things just says he can't move anymore for the whole turn. So if early in the round they obey him to take that action, and he takes that action and just can't move anymore for the round, then that's it. You're done. Malisaurus, and you basically paid 10 or so Soulstones for no effect. And if it's a model that's like super fragile, or something that's just going to die immediately, that's like designed for combat, it's not necessarily bad design, I would say, but it might be bad for the crew or the setting, and it might be more of a flavor design, or might be something that's not as aggressively competitive. But a lot of the time when we're saying bad, and particularly we're talking about a GG, we'll be talking about like in Gaining Grounds 3, all of the schemes and strats were very focused around you being in a specific place and not dying. And so models that were very fragile were less good in that Gaining Grounds, which is I think intentional, and it sort of keeps the game fresh as we transition. So transitioning into Gaining Grounds 4, we have a bunch of crews that got way better because they were more scheme focused, dropping scheme markers and interacting took a pretty substantial uptick in value. And so we see things like Molly and Nelly just getting way better in GG4 because all of their abilities are just better. Not to say that they were bad like specifically they were just bad or badly designed models, but in GG3 you wouldn't see them as much because they were like bad for the setting. So it kind of matters. Sometimes it's GG, sometimes it's not.
Number 7.
Kidnap is a term used often. I couldn't find it on any cards. Can you define what that means? Yes, we can.
Absolutely. Kidnap is a concept. It is not a term. So generally what's happening with Kidnap is you are using an ability on a card to scalpel out a key piece of the opponent's crew and bring it into a very unfavorable position where you can then kind of dogpile on it and kill it. There's a whole handful of kidnaps. The one that comes to mind for me immediately is the Angler 2 kidnap. The master can shoot out a tide marker, use Oh No Ooga Booga, pull the person back in via the tide marker, like teleport the model like 8 inches to like a really crappy position, and then have the rest of its crew like beat it to death. Another form of kidnapping would be a really common model is Sun Wukong. He has an ability where he can pull a model 5 inches in some random direction, whatever he feels like, and then, you know, put it in a bad spot and have the rest of his team beat on it. Then sometimes it's even more involved than that. When Tara 2 was very first released, there was the infamous pre-33 nerf list where you would you would try to kidnap or bury and like forcibly keep buried an opponent's master by slingshotting 33 and then having like a very high statted duel to bury the master, keep it buried, and kill it. So generally the concept is you're using some form of forced movement ability or entrapment ability to scalpel out a particularly high value model in the opponent's crew. Usually it's the master. It's not always the master, but sometimes it is. And then you can either kill that master or block it out of the game or just keep it kidnapped. I guess the other big version of a kidnap would be like Ivan 2, how Nathan buried Seamus in the Shadow Realm with a very rude shadow bury, and then just scooty booted his emissary over the marker so that I couldn't get at it or ever interact with it, and effectively removed my master from the game, which was interesting.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what kidnap means.
Yeah,
Brandon?
Yeah. Kidnap is very simply just displacing a model, and usually we see things like with Zips Up We Go, which is just an ability that lets you place the model. It's an attack, a melee attack that lets you place a model within 3 of itself. So 3 inches plus base.
Oh yeah, Zip's a good call.
If it's like a 40 mil or a 50 mil, you're talking like 5 inches. You do that multiple times, you can displace a model by like 10 inches. And usually kidnapping a model is fine, but it usually comes along with you placing it next to a model that is ready to tear its face off.
Yeah, so Zip kidnap's a good call on that.
Yeah,
honestly.
or the Dead Rider kidnap's another one where the Dead Rider just literally
that's another good one.
Just literally has a trigger on his melee attack that's like push this model a whole bunch of inches based on the number of crows you have, which he discards as tokens to get more, and then push the other model into base contact with it. But it's displacing an opponent's model by an amount, by any movement ability or shenanigan, and then usually it's immediately followed up by you activating a bunch of models and killing that model in a place where normally they're safe in their crew, but when they're 10 inches away, there's nothing that the opponent can do to get to them, and they're dead before they can do anything.
And usually they're trying to kidnap a model that's already activated so they can't activate and run away.
Yeah.
Number 8.
So what are the criteria for a crew to be a bubble crew? It's very simple. Models that just have a bunch of abilities and want to stay near each other.
Yeah, and I think some core examples of that are like Tony Ironsides, Tony 1, Jezda or Yezda is like Yep. Jesda won really the most, I think. I would think also like another Bubble Crew. Tiri is a good example of Bubble Crew for sure. Pandora 1 is a Bubble Crew. It's crews that have a like they kind of want to like group up for an area of effect scenario. I think the interesting concept is that I can think of both offensive and defensive bubble crews.
For
Like
sure.
I said, like Pandora 1 is what I would consider an offensive bubble crew, whereas Tony Ironsides, Tony 1, would be a defensive bubble crew. Jesda is a defensive bubble crew. So the things that the crew might do is different, but generally what it's saying is a crew that stays in proximity to one another for strong proximity synergy based effects. Anything else, Brandon?
No, I mean that's pretty much it. Yeah, crews that get better and more powerful or more defensive by being near each other, and so you want to stay and keep everyone in a bubble. Or offensively, you want to get all of your opponents near you, like Jackdaw and stuff like that.
All right. Number 9.
Number 9. How do you determine when and when not to cheat a duel? This is probably the deepest question in the entire list.
This man drops like a documentary book.
This
I was looking at these questions before we did it, right? Obviously, doing some level of small prep, and it's like this question remind me of old Magic card book that I watched a pro wrote one time, and he wrote like a.
Are you talking Next Level Magic by Patrick Chapin, alleged murderer?
No, I'm talking about Gush. Somebody wrote a book on Gush, the Magic card. And it's like such a deep question, like how to play this one card that does like 4 things that are really important. So here's my thought on it, right? And I thought about this a lot, so I actually have an answer here, but I'm curious to see what Air Brendan says as well. So when I think of things like duels that need to be cheated, it comes to 2 big criteria for me. Things that need to happen for me to win the game or to progress my game state to a point where I can win it, or things that need to not happen so that if they happen, I might not be able to win the game.
That's the same criteria. I have 2 as well, and that was one of mine.
Yeah. So it's like, do I need to hit this attack to remove this model so that I can win this area of control war? Do I have to win this? If I don't win this, does something bad happen that like isn't good for me? And the answer, I think, really comes more to knowing when you don't need to cheat, knowing when a duel is not that important and you don't need to spend one of your only severes in your hand on it, right? Like you only have 2 severes, let's say, for a turn. Knowing when to have hand discipline. For me, that's the big question. And as I've gotten better at the game, my hand discipline has gotten better. Knowing when it's okay to let a duel slide and, okay, I didn't hit with that attack. That's not that important. That's not the action this turn that I need to take to win my points for this round. That's not the action I need to take this turn to remove this key model. That's not the action I need to stop my opponent from taking so that my master doesn't die. That's not the action that I need to stop my opponent from taking so that they don't score their scheme that they're telegraphing to me. That's how I think of things that I need to cheat or not cheat. And I try to hold my hand cards for things like that. I guess another big one would be like the biggest glaring example to me would be if you're a summoner and it's a once per turn summon, you need to cheat that. You need to have a plan for cheating that. You can't just be going off the top, right? Because that's key to how you're going to win the game. So like an Asami summon, you need to have a plan for how you're going to do that. You're probably going to cheat that duel 100% of the time, right? Like, I don't know many people that just free ball an Asami summon or free ball a Summer Teeth Jones summon, something like that, you know? That's my perspective. Brandon.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. I think really importantly, at the start of every turn, I will look at my hand. I will look at what actions I need to do to score, and then make sure that if some of them need specific cards or specific suits or specific numbers, if I can't just add a suit with a Soulstone, that I have that card set aside and I save it. A lot of times that's like minions and enforcers that can't use Soulstones that need a specific suit to get a good trigger off. It's not always that. Sometimes it's, I have like 3 really important actions that have a target number of 10 and they're stat 5, so I need 5. So I have to make sure that I have at least 3 5s so that when I do those, I can make sure factually that they go off because they're integral to my scoring. I need this. I know my opponent's going to use this ability. I'm going to have to pass this TN14 willpower duel, or my model's going to be buried for the whole game and it'll die. So I have to keep like an 8 so his willpower, or like a 9 so his willpower will let me get out of this box or whatever I'm in. The other really important criteria that I look at is if it's not something that's necessary, is it going to cost me anything to let this go, or can I make it cost my opponent more than it will cost me? And so Malifaux is very much a game where you win or lose by incremental advantage. So by slowly and continuously building up advantage for yourself and disadvantage for your opponent. So if you know that your opponent, let's say, is attacking you with something in melee or trying to disengage from melee, and they need to go do something with that model, and you know what that is, and you can cheat to either keep them in melee or make their attack miss so your model doesn't die, and even if it's a model you don't care about, but it will keep them stuck in combat and make them have to disengage so they can't interact, or not be able to get as far because they have to spend another action to another AP to throw another attack at that model, even if it's going to die, sometimes that can be worth cheating a card, a low or moderate or even high card, to make sure that they have to spend the extra resources. So you'll see this a lot, especially in the end game where you just trap people in combat so that they can't walk away and interact. That's, I think, a big deal. But also if it's a model that is about to activate and is definitely going to heal itself for some, or it's a model that is going to regen and be able to basically get near or back to full, then cheating the extra card to make them miss instead of letting the model die is, generally speaking, much to your advantage, because then they'll heal and it'll undo a bunch of their actions. And you can really boil it down to cost or scoring, or even just action economy. They're going to spend 2 attacks to try and kill this model. If I can spend 1 card to cancel their 2 attacks because I'm going to activate this guy and heal immediately after, which will completely invalidate their 2 AP, then I traded a card for an AP, and that's an uptrade. Does that make sense?
I think that's a good overview.
And that's what I think about. Granted, we could talk for literally hours, I think, on this aspect, but that's sort of some of the things that we think about.
Number 10.
A lot of praise for Candy and the Wicked Dolls, and I don't understand what makes them good.
So this is actually a really good example of 2 different aspects of questions that we've already covered. So I'll cover the Wicked Dolls pretty simply. I think Brandon's going to agree with me here. Wicked Dolls are a example of a very, very AP efficient, very, very value-laden model. They're incredibly cheap, and they are significant models.
I used that for an earlier example about that. The very point, Doug.
Yeah,
I forgot this is the question.
Yeah, they're incredibly cheap, and they have 3 AP because they also have creep along. They're stealthed and they're significant, and they can achieve either primary strategies or schemes at a really, really efficient point cost as long as they stay alive.
And they're versatile, so you never have to pay the tax on them.
Yeah, they're versatile, so they're always 3 Soulstones. Candy is a really good example of a proactive potential way to alpha strike somebody or just be incredibly disruptive. Candy is a model that has a passive aura that is incredibly punishing for models that are just activating around her. So there's a lot of different lists that have existed for a while where they kind of have a Candy delivery system, whether or not it's fly with me, drop her off, fly with me again, drop her off somewhere, or push her or throw her or ride with me or somewhere. And you put her into a bunch of people, and then you let her passive auras reap what Brandon was talking about just 2 seconds ago, which was incremental AP advantage, making them basically bleed value by just being around her. And it requires you to have an ability to manipulate the movement of Candy to get around that, but that's why people think Candy is kind of a son of a bitch.
Yeah. I mean, the Wicked Dolls are cheap and very effective, and Candy is just absurdly strong. She protects herself because until she activates, she's manipulative, so you're at neg flips. And if you're not declaring triggers against her, she just takes 2 less damage, and she's a henchman, so she can stone. And she has 6 willpower, which is pretty good. 5 defense is less good, but it's fine. And then the big deal is what Doug said is her ability. because stunned is one of the strongest debuffs in the game. It makes you lose actions basically because it can make your bonus action count towards it.
And also because all the new models and perennially fast actions are becoming like core to the power, like
Yeah.
triggers and fast actions, and stun fucks with both of those.
Yeah, and stun just flat out says you can't do triggers, and if you activate your candy, there's nothing that you can do about it. You are discarding a card, which is bad, and you are getting stunned. The fact that it's both of those abilities combined is just very, very nasty. And it makes things that are right near her, activating near her, more difficult to kill her because then they can't declare triggers, so she's taking less damage, and it just kind of spirals. So, like, being able to, the downside of that is that if she hasn't activated yet, but that's, like, not really a cost because you can very easily get around that with a lot of different movement abilities, or just, like, activate her last on turn 1 and walk after you give her fast, right? So Candy just has a lot of really, really... And also when you stun you, she gets to deal damage to you or move you around a little bit. So, like, there's all kinds of shit that Candy it just has that she's just very, very strong because she has a bunch of synergy with herself. She doesn't need a whole crew to go with her, and she's very, very disruptive.
Number 11.
Am I wrong, or is Santiago a good card on paper, but really should be cheaper in the game?
No, you're correct. That's the same take that Andre Demings, who won Worlds, had. You are literally spot on. We agree.
Yeah, I mean, look, he costs 8. I don't know how you hire this guy. I think I said this in the tier list, which should be... Actually, have we put that one out yet, or is that one...
We have not put that out. We
haven't put it out. Stay tuned, because we'll have a tier list on this very topic soon.
No, but yeah, we all agree with you, yes.
No, yeah.
All right, number 12.
How do you determine when to use your Soulstones to prevent damage and add a suit or plus or neg flip to duel or plus flip to duels, etc.? They're a really limited resource, and I tend to hoard them until the end of the game.
So my whole thought process on this is the exact same about when to cheat a duel. Like cheating duels and using Soulstones are two of the ways that a Malifaux player can express agency over the game state and the board state. And it is actually, factually, the way and the reason that Malifaux as a game system is such a skill expressive game, because that is what is allowing you to control the ebb and the flow of the game state and the board state. So for all of the reasons we just talked about a decision tree on when to cheat a duel, is the same decision tree that I would be using when to use a suit, when to try to prevent damage, when to add a plus or a negative to a duel. It's when a really important thing is happening and you need to try to tip the scales in your favor to either advance your game state, devance their game state, or just prevent one of your important models from dying. And it's important to be able to recognize those moments and save your Soulstones for those moments and not use them on erroneous bullshit.
Yeah. So specifically, I think there's a big deal about summoners. That's a huge deal, right? But it sort of extends more. So models that have actions that have very specific triggers, and usually without like a high TN, you can expect that, assuming that they're henchmen, attuned, or masters, that you're going to want to spend one every time you want to use that action.
Right? Or plan to have your hand already to compensate for that.
Yeah. And so like once I know how many I need, assuming that I'm going to do that action every time. Obviously, if you just flip a natural 13 of crows when you're trying to get a thing with a high crow to, great, fantastic. But planning what your need is first, and then after that, spending them judiciously when it's not going to be a complete waste of time. Like if your model, if your opponent just activated their beater that's engaging one of your models, and it has like 3 health left, and their beaters him in 3, and like he has 3 AP because he's all buffed up and does extra damage to stuff. Is it worth Soulstoning to prevent damage? Probably not, because they're just going to kill you. Would maybe Soulstoning to prevent damage mean he has to sink an extra AP and therefore not kill a different model? If so, maybe. But it's all situational.
Or are you gonna? And then on the flip side of that, there's very black and white ones where it's like, you need a 12 to summon a Joraguma with Asami. And you have a 12, but it's not a 12 that you need of the correct suit. You're going to Soulstone that if you have some amount to get the Joraguma out, because it's a critical must-hit action that you have the card for.
Yeah, if you're playing a summoner, you should just expect that 5 of your Soulstones are going to that summoner.
No, or you're
Um,
planning your hand towards it. That's not a. I feel like that's an extreme statement. Like you
uh,
have to balance
no,
the
not at
hand
all.
and the.
Nope, that's. I mean, yeah, obviously, if you have a card that can let you not have to spend a Soulstone, great. But when I bring a summoning model, I expect to have 5 Soulstones that I might have to devote towards that if I'm going to need to summon a model every turn. And if you don't plan for that, then you might just not be able to. And maybe that's okay. Maybe you don't care. Maybe I really need to summon a model on turn 1, 2, and 3, and then after that it's just gravy. Great. Then make sure that you at no point in time go below the 3 Soulstones you need for that until you use them for that. And then if you don't need to use them, amazing. And obviously, a card is less valuable than a Soulstone because you draw cards every turn. Soulstones you just get one time at the start of the game unless you have some cool ability to get them. You know? But yeah, just be judicious and don't try and go crazy with them.
Number 13.
Working towards schemes and strats is one of the toughest things to me about this game, coming from other game systems where model elimination is typically the key to victory. How do you weigh your decisions in list building on what to satisfy a strat scheme or nullifying your opponent's ability to do the same?
I always try to. I do an ancillary check of my opponent to make sure that the crew that I'm playing against is not what I would consider a skew crew. When I say a skew crew, what I mean is there is a small percentage of crews in this game that will fundamentally skew how the engagement of the game happens. And if you, as the opponent, do not compensate for that in list building, you will get boozled. And that is a technical term that will happen to you. I will give you now a couple of examples of that. Levy 1 is a skew crew. In terms of if you don't prepare against him and you don't bring tools, you don't account for it in list building, you're going to get swamboozled. Seamus 1 is a skew crew. If you don't plan for fighting Seamus or have some idea about how you're going to approach that game, you're going to get swamboozled, right? Those are masters where when you see them, you need to account for them in the list building process. Short of that, I will always initially look at the pool and try to build my crew around the schemes and the strategy. So I'm trying to pick models that are going to help me score the scheme and the strategy. I'm trying to proactively build my crew in a way where those models are going to be good at doing at least 2 of the schemes and at least be acceptable at the strategy. That's usually my goal. I usually want to try to show up to deployment being like, I've selected these guys for this reason, and they're going to go and try to help me score, Hidden Martyrs and Power Ritual. I built my list to do those 2 things today. And because I built my list to do Hidden Martyrs and Power Ritual, I'm going to have a couple of really, really, really fast models that can separate and get these markers out into corners, and a bunch of little guys that could be annoying that I'm going to try to bait my opponent into killing. Have a plan.
It's weird that you're playing GG all. Also, I miss Hidden Martyrs. Holy shit, I love that.
Yeah, please bring it back. Just have a plan, right? And hire your models according to that plan, and then try to play it out to make that plan happen. Obviously, it might not work out, but that's how I do that, right? I sanity check myself whether or not my opponent is a don't pass go, have to consider this skew matchup. If they're not, plan for the pool and try to execute on the pool and outplay your opponent. That's how I approach it. Brandon.
Yeah. I do very similar. I mean, the very first thing I'll see is my opponent a specific thing. Like, if they are just way going to outpace me at specific schemes or specific strategies, that skill set, though, of knowing which crews do that is something that I've had to develop over the entirety of the time I've been playing this game. And unless you've been playing Malifaux for 3 or 4 years, that's going to be probably not a likely skill that you have right off the bat. But it never hurts to read their master and ask your opponent questions. Maybe look through their crew as you're building if you have time, which isn't always viable in a tournament setting. Past that, you should know sort of what your crew, the crew that you're going to bring does, and know whether or not they're viable in the strategy, because you're going to have to do that. That's not negotiable. And if you, like, for instance, in Raid the Vaults, you want models that are very sturdy and can survive near things or move your opponent's models away from things. And so those are 2 ability sets that I would prioritize bringing. Playing explosives, you want to make sure that you really have, like, models that are fast and ideally enforcer or henchman and durable. So if you can get models models that can hold multiple tokens and can run around the board really fast and not die, fantastic. You're probably halfway to scoring 4 points on plant explosives. Likewise, you really need to just sort of work your way through a gaining grounds whenever it comes out, because there are schemes and strategies that just make sort of decisions really easy for you. Like In Your Face, for instance. In Your Face is a really good scheme to score, and sometimes people don't really care whether or not like their crew makeup supports it or doesn't. But an easy way to make sure that your opponent flat out can't get any points in Your Face is to just hire no models that cost 8, or hire very durable ones that aren't going to be sitting near your master or getting near your opponent's master. If you can do that, you can just flat out deny them the ability to score it. And so building your list with those things in mind, it's kind of just like taking 17 Venn diagrams and picking the models that overlap or don't overlap. But that's something that comes with time and repetition and like reading through and really analyzing what you have for your models and your schemes. And the easiest way to practice this is to just go through each scheme and be like, okay, what models in my crew that I'm starting to play now are going to be really good in this? Are they going to be super effective in this? Or are they not? And just making a yes, no. That's a super, super easy thing. You can have that with you to make decision making a lot easier in schemes and strats.
Number 14.
Is turtling / castling a valid strategy in Malifaux? No, not really.
I don't think it is generally good to just turtle and castle in Malifaux, because most of the time you have to be in like a handful of different positions on the board state. There are definitely specific schemes and strat pools that will allow you to do it, but it also exposes you to a lot of stuff that your opponent can do, like blasts and shockwaves.
Yeah.
But sometimes there are very specific crews that are set up to do that. Like there are crews like a Tony Ironside's one crew that wants to like castle somewhere in the middle to where they can kind of get a bunch of their scheme strat points in like a certain specific area of the map and pull models in and beat them to death or something like that. It can be very specific, but I would say it is the exception to the rule rather than the rule.
Yeah, there definitely are crews like Tony One is probably the prime example. She's the most bubbly master in the game, and this kind of goes back to the bubble question earlier, right? So like Tony One, she's always going to be kind of have a cluster of models. Jedza One's always going to have a cluster of models. Maxine One, you'll see have a cluster of models next to each other because they have really good protective abilities. But in general, at some point, turtling, keeping models near each other, that's possibly very viable, especially if you're in a crew that facilitates it. But at some point, you're going to have to get on your opponent's half of the board with some number of models to score the strat. And there's never, because Malifaux is a progressive scoring game where you have to score a point of the strat in turn 2, 3, 4, and 5, you're never really going to be in a position, unless they radically change the next gaining grounds, where you can just sort of be in one position the whole game and never move. That's completely not viable. Even the bubble crews sort of
there are some scenarios where you can, like, because Jezda's aura is 6 inches radially and it covers like 13 inches.
Yeah,
sometimes
you
can
get in the center and just hold the center. That might be viable too. But what you're doing in that strategy is sort of inviting your opponent to have hired something that just blows your bubble apart, and it's really easy to get into it.
You're telegraphing your play, and you damn well better win your telegraph, because if you don't, everything's going to fall apart for you. Yeah. But sometimes you can. Like one of the best players that I've ever played against, Nathan01, he plays Jezda bubble, and he's one of the best players in the world, and I've never beaten his Jezda bubble. I've like even come close to it. Yeah. But
the rub with that whole sort of strategy, though, is that to be successful in that, you need to know everything that they can throw at you, and to do that, you need to know the rest of the game and their 60 masters. Good luck.
Yeah. All right.
So it's possible. It's just hard.
Number 15.
What is your thought process before taking your turn? We kind of touched on this a little bit already, but
it's a combination of, to really simply and quickly answer this, my thought process going into a turn is, what are the most important things that I need to do this turn? What are the most important things that I need to stop my opponent from doing this turn? And then I look at those things as a general premise. And then I look at my hand and I say, how am I going to convert my hand into achieving those things? And what do I need out of my hand? Is this a turn where I need a bunch of high cards to wipe a model out? Okay, well then I might have to Soulstone or dig or pop in excess funds or something like that to try to support that. Is this a turn where I'm running away from a bad scenario and I'm going to go scheme and I don't anticipate trying to have to pick a fight? Okay, well then I might be looking for some certain suits then to hit some very specific triggers on some models that are not attuned. And those are the general things that I think of, and I try to quickly evaluate those, and then go into the turn and execute it.
Yeah.
Brandon.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of I think of when I start turns, there's 3 levels of stuff I want to achieve. Level 1, what am I doing to score this round? How am I scoring the strat? Am I scoring my schemes this the first half of my schemes this round? Is this going to be the last turn of the game because we're going to run out of time? Should I be prepared to have locked in a point? That's pretty much that. Once I've decided how I'm going to score my strat and how I'm going to score my schemes this round, and obviously be as flexible as you can in that. Don't be like, I'm going to put this model here, and if it dies, I'm fucked, because that's a bad strategy to begin with. Then I look at what I need to spend that turn. So if I have a summoner, again, that's just sort of the easiest answer. Like if I'm summoning a thing, I need this. I need to have a 12 in my hand, and I need to have a Soulstone, or that 12 needs to be a crow, or it needs to be a tome or a mask or whatever. Once I have all of the costs that I know I'm going to lock in down, then I'm like, okay, what can I do to fuck with my opponent this turn? If I jam that guy in, is it going to ruin his plans? I know he scored this scheme. Can I make sure that this model that he needs to score that scheme dies? Can I make sure that this model that he needs to score a scheme on my end isn't where it needs to be for him to score it? And then just sort of go from there. But it's always scoring first, then cost second, and then what I can do to mess with my opponent's plans third. And then after that, have fun.
Number 16.
What are the big things that you consider before you commit yourself to a move/action?
The literal, I just copy and paste my answer from what I said before.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I really want to add is, I look at where I'm going and try and make sure that if it's a model that needs to be in somewhere, that I try and do that as late as possible to make sure that in the turn, so that my opponent can't mess with it too much. And I try and know if that's really important.
But sometimes you need to activate a model early to get it out of a dangerous area also, if it has
Yeah,
important markers. So that cuts
exactly.
both ways.
Yeah, so if it's something that's important, is, what do I need to do to make sure that's not? Can my opponent just immediately reverse what I did? And if so, is that still worth it to me? Because sometimes it is, because to reverse it, they might have to spend AP they don't want to spend. But just kind of look at the consequences of your actions and what you think will happen. And then, it's a game and you can't make 100% perfect decisions, so it's better to just sort of try things out sometimes.
Number 17.
What are some of the more common mistakes you see new players make?
So I think I have a good old laundry list here. Number 1 is forgetting the radius of your core auras and abilities, or the distance of your core abilities, and putting models into positions where they break synergies because you put a model like 4 inches away from a model that needed to be 3 inches away from a different model instead, right? Like you forgot the radius of a like by your side or bedside banner or something like that, right? I guess bedside banner is the big one that I'm thinking of here. Or another big one is having really, really poor hand control and discipline. So cheating cards that don't matter, and cheating duels that don't need to be cheated, and wasting high cards that could be used with better efficiency elsewhere. Another major thing is blindly making lists and committing them into pools without even looking at the pool or the opponent or the table and how that's going to affect the game. Another big one is just not understanding how some of your core unpack or synergies works with your master or within the crew. And another big one would be not understanding like really important triggers on key models, and those are probably the biggest ones for me.
Yeah, I think you named a bunch of the ones that I have, but just some things that I think are really important. Getting got by the sunk cost fallacy, that's probably the most ridiculous one. So sometimes you will go in for an attack or commit your model to a specific place and try and get something, and then they'll completely flop, right? Which leaves you with maybe a bonus action, maybe an AP left. And knowing now that that's not an option, they're like, well, I'm already here, and then they just, we use the bonus action and then take another swing at something, or take their other 2 swings if they're faster charged or something. And knowing that that's not the answer and doing it anyway. So if you it's never too late to just focus, and it's never too late to try and disengage and get in a position for next turn. And that's kind of what I think I see a lot of people Sometimes I'll see people taking 0 or 10 Soulstones. That's insane. There's never a cause to ever do either of those things, so don't. Maybe like close to 10 and maybe close to 0. There definitely are crews that need less Soulstones, but as a new player, you should be sticking to like 5. You probably don't want way more than that, and you definitely don't want less than that, because Soulstones really let you fix some of your mistakes, and the newer you are, generally the more mistakes you'll have. I also see new players a lot of times not asking questions about their opponent's stuff, and it's generally speaking advisable to not just give away your whole plan and strategy to your opponent. But if you're not sure exactly how something works and you're like, well, I think I can do this, but then you like charge a model in and then like take a setup action and then get to where you're going for your big plan, and your opponent's just like, yeah, I have a rule that says you can't do this, like, I'm disguised, you can't charge me. Asking, even if it's going to broadcast what your plan is, your opponent can't lie to you. And in Malifaux, the community is amazing. They'll be like, yeah, you can't charge this guy because he's this. So like, asking and sort of, even if it's going to broadcast or sort of tip your hand a little bit, always will be the better plan as you're getting used to the game. And then the other thing, I think the thing that I probably see people, especially converts from other games, do more than anything else is focusing on trying to kill your opponent's models to the exclusion of all other goals, because that just doesn't matter. Killing models in Malifaux very rarely is the most important thing to do. And even then, the alpha strike, like get all their, like kill all your opponent's models plan, is a very, very difficult path to tread and is a really, really high level strat, because your opponent usually doesn't need too many models to be able to score. And if you focus on killing your opponent's models to the exclusion of scoring, you might even come close to tabling them and then lose 8-1. Right? So above all else, the only thing that matters in a game of Malifaux, aside from having fun, because it's a game and you should, is the score. So even if you're going to lose models, scoring points is always the first thing and most important thing that you should be doing.
Number 18.
Does the rule of cool apply at all in competitive play? No.
No, it does not.
Not even remotely. I mean, maybe you should have your models painted if that's like a tournament requirement, but no. Malifaux is a very, very tight rule set, very tight game, and no. I want to do this thing. Can I break the rules because it's cool? The answer will be no 100% of the time.
Yeah, this is just not the right game system.
It's not the vibe for it.
Yeah. It's not the right game system for it. There are other game systems where absolutely that's the right time and place. I think the one that comes to mind is, what's that Victorian vertical based Carnival?
Carnival.
Yeah, like Carnival is an example of a game system where, like, yeah, absolutely, it's built around the rule of cool.
Yeah.
Malifaux is not. It's not the game system to do that, because everything is very X's and O's, very specific. And that's kind of the vibe of what you're signing up for when you play the game. Number 19.
If you draw the Black Joker, do you just hold on to it until the end of the game, or do you use it as a resource for a discard a card, do X action?
I absolutely discard it if and when necessary, knowing that I've had it. I do not want to hold on to the Black Joker for the rest of the game and have my hand size be reduced by 1.
Yeah. There's, I think, definitely it is worth, if you get it in like the middle of a turn, keeping it at least until the start of the next turn is super, super useful. Also, even in the most flippy decks possible, I think that the very latest that you care at all is the start of turn 5. At the start of turn 5, you should be discarding it if you have it in your hand. But a lot of people do seem to prioritize holding the Black Joker forever and ever, and I would just, in almost all cases, rather have a slight risk of that and have another card in my hand. But like, it is useful to not know that you can't Black Joker damage, so like, usually the earlier in the game, the more likely you are to hold it. But
you can hold on to it in a relatively sneaky Pete manner, but ain't nobody holding on to a Black Joker for 5 turns in a row and reducing the relative opportunity cost of their hand stack size just to fuck around like that. It's not reasonable. Like, you're not taking a 5-card hand for 5 turns because you're afraid of a little Black Joker. That ain't happening.
Yeah, always I will get rid of it. Usually I'll pitch it at like turn 2 or 3 at the very latest if I have it. I've never once in the entire history of me playing Malifaux have gotten a Black Joker on turn 1 and held it the whole game.
Yeah, you're just not doing that. Number 20.
Number 20. So this is more of a rule-specific question, but here's how it goes. So Perdita has a defense mask quick draw. Does this mean that if she stones in a mask or flips a mask on defense, she gets to use this ability, or does it only work if someone shoots her and the attack fails and she has the mask that makes this go off? So defensive triggers are the triggers that you'll see occasionally on the front of someone's card. So specifically in the case of Perdita, her quick draw trigger, the first thing you want to look for is if the word says after resolving. After resolving is a magical phrase in Malifaux, and it basically means it happens no matter what if the criteria are met. So in this case, having a mask. But if it doesn't say after resolving, like this one, is if the action is a gun action, the attacking model suffers 2/4/5 damage, the damage flip suffers a neg flip. That is a trigger, and you are only allowed to declare triggers if you win the duel. In this case, it also has to be a gun duel. So with quick draw, Perdita it's only on defense, and sometimes you'll see it on defense, and sometimes willpower, and sometimes move, and sometimes even size. I think there's one. So you always want to make sure that you're looking specifically what defensive stat it works on, because if you get attacked with a willpower gun, which there are plenty of in the game, it flat out won't work. And then Perdita has to win the duel, meaning your opponent has to miss, and then you will
get the effect.
Really importantly, if there's a variable damage flip, 2/4/5, and we see people do this, forget or ignore this all the time, variable damage flips are always decided by the result of the duel, which means if the margin of victory that Perdita has is 5 or lower, she will be at a neg flip. Now, this damage flip suffers a neg flip on top of it, but if you beat them by 5 or less, you'll be at 2 neg flips. If you beat them by 11, then you will be at a plus flip, which will cancel out the neg flip, and then you get to cheat the 2/4/5. So defensive triggers are really, really tricky. I would strongly recommend you look at the resistance trigger rule in the rulebook. It should walk you through it, if not better than I did, at least similarly.
I think the core thing to know that you already did a really good job of outlining at the beginning. I think what you outlined at the beginning was really good and really pertinent. On defensive triggers, unless they say otherwise, you have to win the duel to get the effect.
Yeah, after resolving is the key one.
But after resolving, there are a couple of other ones, yeah, Brendan's right, that will change this. The biggest one that you'll see defensively is after resolving, which means regardless of what happened, this is happening. A key one that you'll see is regret, which is after resolving, end the opponent's turn or end the opponent's activation. But the rule of thumb here, because I had this when I started, I got this confused.
Everyone does.
Yeah.
Literally one of the most confusing aspects of the game.
For all triggers to go off, you have to generally win the duel unless the timing states otherwise. Defensive triggers are the same. So you have to win your defense duel, i.e. Perdita has to dodge it to get that quick draw.
Yeah. And specifically, like, if you want to see it templated that with the after resolving ability, like keyline, I should say, look at Tony Ironside's 1. You'll see that she has a defensive trigger called Good Shot My Turn, and it says right at the start, after resolving, which means it always happens.
Always happens.
If this, gain an adrenaline token, if it was a melee attack, they take 2/3/4, which can't be cheated, or 2/3/5, which can't be cheated.
Yeah.
So that's that.
Number 21.
In Malifaux, it's important to manage your resources. On the surface, the resources are your cards and stones. What are some other things that you'd consider resources that should be managed?
I think there's 3 primary resources in Malifaux, and if you go one step derivative more, there's 4. It's your cards, it's your stones, and it's your models. And if you break that down one more level, it's your cards, your stones, and your models. And by virtue of the AP that those models generate for you, that's how you get your value, and that's what you're supposed to manage. And that is a really good question that kind of packages up this whole conversation, because it brings us back to the very, 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 very first question that we opened this conversation with, which is AP efficiency. So your models break down into a pool of massive AP that you need to efficiently manage in order to score points. And you're doing that by leveraging a very practiced and hopefully restrained usage of your cheating cards and your Soulstones. And if you can do all of those things, you'll win a bunch of games of Malifaux. So again, just to reiterate, the resources are cards, stones, models, and the models generate AP that you then need to apply efficiently to then score your points vis-a-vis strategies and schemes.
Yep. I mean, that's pretty much it. There maybe is the argument in certain crews that there definitely is the argument in condition-based crews that, like, that's also a resource that you need to track. So like Mick Morning cares about poison, Riva cares about burning, right? And that's another layer on top of it. But
but
as a
still
general rule,
generated
really,
by the models.
it's in addition to cards and stones. Very, very importantly, it's AP is like the thing, because AP efficiency comes from managing your AP resource very well. And that's pretty much that.
That's all, folks.
I don't know that it is, but
it's I guess. But I mean, to be honest, I think that this was one of the more like informative and real world examples of like questions that people encounter when they're like past that initial learning barrier in Malifaux, and they're looking to get like, I know, like they have their sea legs per se in Malifaux, right? And they're looking to really start to mix it up and apply a couple more advanced mechanics, and they start to ask themselves these important questions about how to actually functionally, from a tactical standpoint, take all of this knowledge that they now have about the game system and turn that into Malifaux wins on the table. Because that's a very real transitional period where you go from phase 0 to phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3 to then like battling Pope Darpa and Grogdog in the World MWS Finals, right? Like, it's a journey. Everybody goes on a growth journey from a player perspective. And the really cool thing for me is to be able to have what I thought Spilled Paint Pot did, which was lay out a very realistic shared experience that I think a lot of players that are playing Malifaux going through what he's going through have these questions. And I think it was really cool to be able to sit down and just kind of talk through and like try to the best of our ability, muse about, well, what does that mean? You know, because I haven't asked myself that question in a long time. You know, you and I have been running at 100 miles an hour, running tournaments, running the Discord community, pumping out Malifaux videos. And I think you and I very rarely look back into the rear view mirror, because it's been a hell of a fast-paced 4 to 5 years for us from when we started this thing, you know?
Yeah, it does kind of feel like we started playing Malifaux last week and now it's here, but like,
it's been over 4 years.
Yeah, wild stuff, dude. Well, it's been over 4 years.
So I just want to say a huge thank you to Spilled Paint Pot specifically for coming up with this list. This is awesome. I think the thing that I love about it as much is that it's a perfect example of our Discord community, and just the Danger Planet community at large, like having really cool, useful, topical ideas that we can then turn into videos that can hopefully help people.
Yeah. So if you have any more questions that are like this, or if you think we misanswered something, or if you have questions and want to probe more into something that we said, jump in the comments. That's a super helpful place. Tag us specifically, reply to stuff that we put in. I'll keep an eye on the comments on this video for sure. But also jump in the Discord. In addition to just being in the Discord, which is a great place to ask questions, pretty soon, without giving a specific on what day, it's probably going to be a weekday night, but we're still working out the logistics. I'm going to be hanging out doing some hobby stuff in the Discord channel.
Hobbit time with Uncle Brandon, baby.
Which would be a great time to ask questions about somebody who's played the game a bit, you know? Just
saying. Also, you can ask Brandon about his illicit past and all of the drug smuggling and illegal activities that he's done to get him up until this point. He's wanted in over 50 space parsec stations.
Yeah. Parsec is a measurement of time, so that's not true, but okay.
What's the line from Star Wars where they walk into the cantina and it's the like two criminals? He's like, "My friend doesn't like you, I don't like you," and then like Luke tries to turn away, and then he's like, "I'm wanted in over 50 systems," and then they cut his arm off with a lightsaber. You know.
I have no idea what you're talking about. The original trilogy of Star Wars movies, 4, 5, and 6 are bad.
No, what? Okay, hold on. That's a totally different video. Now we're getting off the rails.
I'm leaving this in. Yeah, 1, 2, and 3 better than 4, 5, and 6. 7, 8, and 9 better than 4, 5, and 6. And I'll fucking die on this hill. Thanks for watching, everybody. Goodbye, the internet.
It's heresy.
Do you want to say goodbye to the internet?
No, I'm too upset to say goodbye to the internet.
Okay, I'll say it on behalf. Goodbye, the internet. Hey everyone, thanks for stopping by the planet. You can check out the video description below for all of our important info and links. You can see a link to the Discord if you want to come be nerds on the internet with us. We have channels for like all the games that we're playing and all of our community members are excited about. You can also check out all of our affiliate links for like our Redbubble merch store, our Pro Acryl discount code because they make the best hobby supplies on our planet and yours. And of course, our weird affiliate link if you're buying Malifaux stuff straight from Jonathan Q. Weird himself. Most importantly, though, you can see a link to our Patreon where I post things from time to time, like behind the scenes cuts or early vids, and we even have a tier where I'll bake you cookies and send them to you in real life. Thanks a ton to our current patrons who cover the cost of all of our software to make these videos, and we couldn't do it without them. You can see their names appearing now across the screen. And until next time, goodbye the internet. We did it!